On May 11, 1960, at 8 p.m. in Buenos Aires, a man stepped off a bus. It was dark outside. He turned on his flashlight and headed toward home. At that very moment, someone called out to him in Spanish, "Un momentito, señor." The man turned around and instantly several individuals grabbed him using a painhold technique, shoved him into a car, gagged his mouth, put dark sunglasses on his face, pulled a hood over his head, and drove off in an unknown direction. For nearly a week, his whereabouts remained a mystery. On May 19th, a group of pilots from the Israeli airline El Al arrived at Buenos Aires airport. They were escorting a sick colleague, holding him up as he could barely walk. He was in terrible condition and needed surgery that could only be done in Israel. The pilots boarded the plane with their ailing comrade and took off for Israel. The calendar read May 21st, 1960. The next day, on May 22nd, the Israeli Knesset would officially announce that the man brought into the country was Adolf Eichmann, the long-hidden Nazi executioner, one of the key architects and operators of the Holocaust. He would be put on trial and sentenced to the highest punishment, death by hanging. This moment marked the first time the world heard the name Mossad on the global stage, Israel's intelligence agency, still a mystery to most at the time. Yet throughout the 20th century, the intelligence service of this small country would become one of the most formidable in the world, alongside the CIA and the KGB. April 1st, 1951, the official founding date of Mossad, and that's who we're talking about today. The Eichmann case is one of Mossad's most iconic operations, and we wouldn't know any real details about it until 2007. That year, for the first time, the full list of agents involved in the operation was declassified. The story of Peter Malkin would be told, the man who would later write the book Eichmann in My Hands. That was Mossad's first big high-profile mission. Mossad was created almost immediately after the founding of the State of Israel. This is, of course, a story that deserves its own full episode. But let's briefly set the historical and geopolitical stage. World War II had ended, and the territory that would become Israel was still under British mandate control. Eventually, Britain relinquished the mandate, and the State of Israel was born, surrounded on all sides by hostile neighbors, a ring of Arab states. Why that happened and how everyone became enemies, that's a separate story, which we'll probably cover someday. But the fact remains, Israel was encircled by enemies. It had to defend itself. The country wasn't completely isolated, but at the time it had almost no allies, nothing like the international support it has today. To protect itself, Israel established three specialized intelligence services, Amman, Shin Bet, and Mossad. And soon Mossad moved to center stage. On December 13, 1949, Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion signed a classified document calling for the unification of the three agencies into one. That was the beginning of what would become one of the most effective intelligence services in the world. April 1st, 1951 is considered the official founding date of Mossad. Today we know a lot about its brilliant operations and about its failures. We know that it's a massive organization with a huge budget and a large number of personnel. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, until the 1960s, even the word Mossad was banned from being published publicly. The names of its directors were officially released to the press only in the early 21st century. Before that, total secrecy. So when we throw around numbers about the agency's size or its budget, we can't claim 100% certainty. The figures we have come from leaks and press reports. And yet it all started with a tiny office, with just 15 staff members. At the time, Mossad didn't even have its own field agents. No operatives to carry out arrests or missions. For that, they had to rely on military officers brought in from the outside. The first head of Mossad was a man named Reuven Shiloh. It was he who laid down the foundational principles of how the agency would operate. One of his key quotes was, "The Arabs are the #1 enemy of the Jewish community, and we must place our own agents in Arab society. Mossad's operations must not be limited to Palestine. We must act wherever we are capable of acting." And with that statement, the story of Mossad truly begins. Shiloh was a solid organizer, but according to his contemporaries and intelligence historians, he wasn't considered a strong leader. Nonetheless, he headed Mossad for an entire year. The agency's true ascent began with his successor, Isser Harel. Born Israel Nathanovich Halperin, he came from Vitebsk in the Russian Empire. When the revolution broke out, his family fled to Daugavpils and eventually moved to Israel. In the Jewish self-defense units, he quickly proved himself as a sharp and capable figure, and in time, he was appointed as director of Mossad. His name would later be tied to a long list of Mossad's legendary successes. He became known as a responsible, meticulous, and work-obsessed man. There's even a popular legend about him, that he feared no one, and it's not hard to believe. He had been through war, participated in special operations, and personally led the mission to capture and extract Eichmann. The only person he was ever afraid of? His wife, Rivka. She was the only one who could tell him what to do. Harel was sharp not only in covert operations, but also in political maneuvering and system building. In many ways, it was he who shaped Mossad into the organization the world would come to know. He quickly realized that the world was changing, and that Mossad needed to change with it. They needed modern communication tools, better covert methods, transmitters, gadgets, and most importantly, people. Under his leadership, Mossad's budget grew significantly. He expanded the staff, launched large-scale internal reforms, and brought in waves of young recruits. And then, something unexpected happened. Jews began returning to Israel, not because of some deliberate recruitment campaign, but because of the shifting world. Young, brilliant minds flowed into the country. People born in Russia, France, or those who had fled the Nazi Holocaust, and many of them found their place in Mossad. These were people who could serve as agents, and it was Harel who launched what he called the long-arm strategy. We must place agents everywhere, wherever someone might aid our enemies or potentially become our ally. We must be present. That's when Mossad truly began to grow. Harel had a quote that sums up his approach perfectly. "I need people who feel revulsion at the idea of killing, but people who can be taught to kill anyway." His management style was tough. He believed it was unjust that Israel was surrounded by enemies, and in such a world, any means were fair game. Let's return to the story we started with, the capture of Adolf Eichmann, an SS officer personally responsible for mass executions, not only of Jews but also of other ethnic groups, though primarily Jews. He would later be tried in Israel for these crimes. Eichmann oversaw operations in the Soviet Union and Poland during the war. After the war, many Nazis escaped. Not all were brought before the Nuremberg trials. If you're interested in that subject, let us know in the comments. We might do a separate episode. Eichmann was one of those who managed to disappear. He had an SS tattoo, which was hard to hide, but still managed to obtain fake documents. He claimed, "Yes, I was in the SS, but just a low-level officer." For some time, he hid out in Germany, worked as a lumberjack, divorced his wife, and vanished. In reality, he fled along what were known as the rat lines, secret escape routes, and made his way to Argentina. There, he assumed a new identity and reunited with his wife. He lived quietly, safely, unbothered. Then, sometime in the early 1960s, a German man living in Argentina, a former concentration camp prisoner, overheard something. He was nearly blind by then, but he heard that his daughter, who was socializing with other Germans in the local émigré scene, was dating a young man who proudly said, "My father served the Reich honorably." The man, who had been following news about Nazi hunters, immediately suspected this could be Eichmann. He asked his daughter for more details, and it only confirmed his fears. He wrote to the Attorney General in one of the German federal states, Eichmann's home region, reporting his discovery. There was no reply. We don't know if those documents were passed on to Israeli authorities. But no one began searching for Eichmann, so the man took the next step. He went to the Israeli embassy and told them flat out, "That's him. Eichmann is here. I'm 100% sure." Mossad sent an agent to investigate. The agent infiltrated Eichmann's apartment, took photos, and returned to Israel. After reviewing the materials, Mossad concluded, "This can't be him. The place is way too modest." Eichmann was high-ranking SS. He would never live like this. But the man from Argentina wouldn't give up. He kept writing letters insisting, "You must check again." Eventually, Isser Harel, Mossad's chief, took the lead. Something told him the man might be right. A team was assembled. Around 10 agents flew to Buenos Aires. They tracked Eichmann's entire daily routine, where he went, who he met, what newspapers he bought, when and where he ate. This level of detail, this patience, would become Mossad's signature. Many of their operations would take years to prepare. They followed him, confirmed his patterns. His identity was confirmed, but the operation hit an unexpected snag. For 7 days, the agents held him in hiding, unsure how to get him out of Argentina. The head of the operation kept changing meeting points with the team, mostly in random cafes. The final briefing took place in an airport coffee shop, total secrecy. And finally, a plan. They'd smuggle Eichmann out, posing him as a sick El Al pilot. A plane was scheduled to arrive in Buenos Aires in advance. Through a front company, the Israeli team obtained the cover. Eichmann was drugged, dressed as a sick airline pilot, and flown out of Argentina to Israel. The trial began, and it was broadcast to the entire world. Argentina filed an official protest. "How dare you remove one of our citizens without permission?" But globally, the move was widely supported, including by the United States and West Germany. The only ones who were truly nervous? The West German government. They feared what Eichmann might reveal: names, collaborators. Many former Nazis were still active, working in the Bundeswehr, even holding positions in the government. The East German regime, and by extension the Soviet Union, quickly seized on this. Look at West Germany, still full of Nazis, still loyal to the Reich. And unfortunately, they weren't wrong. Following the trial, journalist Hannah Arendt, writing for The New Yorker, published a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. Read it if you haven't, it's powerful. Her central idea was simple. We like to think that evil is done by monsters, dark, tormented villains. But Eichmann was just a regular man, a bureaucrat, a painfully ordinary person, responsible for unthinkable crimes. In the end, Eichmann was found guilty. In December 1961, he requested clemency, but Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion refused. Eichmann was hanged. The world was shaken. First, it served as another powerful reminder of what Nazi Germany had done. Second, it highlighted the sheer complexity and precision of the operation that had brought him to justice. The mission was codenamed Finale, and as mentioned earlier, the names of the agents involved weren't declassified until 2006. This is how Mossad took the world stage. Another key chapter in Mossad's history under Isser Harel is the story of Eli Cohen, one of the most legendary spies in the agency's history. There's an incredible series about him where he's played by Sacha Baron Cohen, and it's truly a remarkable performance. Eli Cohen was born into a Jewish family living in Egypt. Later, his family repatriated to Israel, but he initially stayed behind in Egypt. When war broke out between Egypt and the neighboring Arab states, Egyptian Jews were rounded up and interned wherever possible. Eventually, Cohen made it to Israel and applied to join Mossad, though he wasn't accepted right away. But over time, he would become one of their top operatives. He was recruited, trained as an undercover agent, and sent to Argentina to build a cover identity. An Egyptian Arab businessman running an international company with a branch in Buenos Aires. Later, he would relocate to Syria, and there he would become one of Mossad's most valuable intelligence assets. Another major operation, considered one of Mossad's most high-profile missions, was called Damocles. This marked the final phase of Harel's tenure. Mossad's agents discovered that Egypt was developing long-range missiles, capable of reaching Israeli territory. The obvious question, who was building them? At first, suspicion fell on the Soviet Union, Egypt's ally at the time, but soon it became clear the Soviets had nothing to do with it. The engineers building the missiles were Germans, the same ones who had worked on the V-2 rockets for Hitler. They had set up a front company in Munich and were recruiting out-of-work experts, then shipping them to Egypt to work at a secret facility called Factory 333. Harel launched Operation Damocles, aimed at neutralizing this threat. But here things got political. Israel notified the West German government, "Your citizens, many of them former Nazi collaborators, are now building missiles for Egypt." West Germany responded by saying they would recall the engineers. Meanwhile, diplomatic ties between Israel and West Germany were improving. The Israeli Prime Minister instructed Mossad to hold off on the operation, trusting that diplomacy would resolve the issue. But Mossad had different intel. According to their sources, no one had been recalled. The engineers were still working, and so Harel launched the operation anyway, on his own initiative. This was the first time Mossad used letter bombs, mailed directly to the German engineers in Egypt. When opened, the letters exploded, causing serious injuries. In one case, a letter was mistakenly left with a secretary. It had been intended for her boss. Despite the complications, Mossad agents systematically eliminated the engineers. They dismantled the technical brainpower behind Egypt's missile program. Factory 333 was left leaderless. From Mossad's perspective, the operation was a clear success. But for Harel, the consequences were personal. He had disobeyed direct political orders. As a result, he was removed from his position. In 1963, Isser Harel stepped down. He was succeeded by Meir Amit, and with him began a new chapter for Mossad. It was the dawn of modernization. Remember, this was 1963, and even then Mossad understood the future depended on technology, and they needed it fast. The first step was computerization. Second, strategic planning. Third, were establishing legal and illegal outposts abroad. Mossad expanded into Indonesia, India, and Singapore, and eventually, even as far as New Zealand. Wherever they could reach, they built networks of agents. But let's return to the story of Eli Cohen, because his case is truly exceptional. In 1961, as mentioned earlier, Mossad sent Cohen to Argentina to establish a new identity. He became Kamel Amin Thabet, a successful Egyptian businessman. He hosted receptions, threw lavish parties with champagne and cigars, and quickly became close friends with a man named Amin al-Hafiz, the Syrian military attaché in Argentina. Their friendship was deep: drinks, women, the full diplomatic lifestyle. And in 1962, al-Hafiz invited him to Syria. "You'll get a promotion, I'll help you expand your business, everything will be taken care of." Naturally, Cohen, who of course wasn't Cohen, accepted the invitation. He moved to Syria and rented an apartment in a highly strategic location. His windows faced both the Syrian General Staff headquarters and the reception hall near the presidential palace. From there, he could track who entered the palace, who visited the military, how many people were in each delegation, and who they were. All of this intelligence was sent back to Mossad, encrypted and secure. Mossad, in turn, responded with encrypted instructions hidden inside Arabic songs broadcast on Israeli radio. It was a brilliantly engineered system. Then in 1963, something extraordinary happened. Amin al-Hafiz, his old drinking buddy from Argentina, became president of Syria, and Cohen, now fully embedded, gained access to nearly everything. He visited secret military sites, photographed classified documents. He became an absolute goldmine for Israeli intelligence. Mossad knew everything about Syria, thanks to him, and Cohen himself rose through Syrian society. He was awarded the rank of colonel, and at one point he became the third most popular candidate in the Syrian presidential elections. He was Mossad's most valuable operative, their crown jewel. In 1964, he secretly visited Israel, just for one day, to celebrate his son's birthday. It would be his last visit, because by then, Syrian authorities had grown suspicious. There were too many leaks. Someone, too close, was passing information. Eventually, the Syrians figured out how, via encrypted radio transmissions. They contacted their Soviet allies, who provided an advanced radio signal locator, a high-tech mobile direction finder. On January 18, 1965, the Soviet device picked up a signal. It was traced to an apartment, the home of the Syrian president's close friend. 8 plainclothes officers stormed in. They caught Cohen in the middle of a transmission. A full search followed. They found a radio transmitter, film reels with photographs of sensitive sites, and in one drawer, bars of soap that turned out to be explosives. He had the full spy kit. Eli Cohen was arrested. Israel tried everything to save him. Through the Red Cross, the UN, French mediation, even Pope Paul VI. The governments of France, Belgium, and Canada were also involved. At one point, Israel considered a commando rescue operation, but the risk was too high. It was called off. Cohen was tortured brutally. In February 1965, he was brought before a military court and sentenced to death. On May 18, 1965, at 3:30 a.m., Eli Cohen was publicly hanged in Damascus, in Marjah Square. His body was left hanging for 6 hours. The Syrian authorities refused to return the body to Israel or to his family. They buried him in the Jewish cemetery in Damascus. 5 years later, Israeli agents tried to recover his remains for reburial in Israel. The mission failed. The Syrians had moved the body, burying it in a 30-meter deep bunker on the grounds of a military base. In 2018, Mossad launched another operation and succeeded in recovering Eli Cohen's wristwatch. Whether it was smuggled out or bought, we don't know, but the watch was returned to Israel and given to his family. That was the final chapter in Cohen's story. He remains to this day Mossad's most famous spy, known to the public. Maybe there were others like him, but if there were, we'll probably never know. In 1966, another operation took place, one that would go down in the annals of intelligence history, Operation Diamond. The Soviet Union had delivered a cutting-edge MiG-21 supersonic fighter jet to Iraq. There were rumors the aircraft might also be supplied to Syria and Egypt, potential enemies of Israel. Naturally, Israel wanted the MiG, if not the plane itself, then at least the technical schematics. But that effort proved unsuccessful. By 1963, the MiG-21 had already been adopted by the air forces of Syria, Egypt, and Iraq, just as Israeli analysts had feared. Attempts to recruit Egyptian pilots failed. Same with Syrian pilots. Complete failure. So in 1966, Mossad began planning something far bolder: steal the jet itself. The hijacking happened unexpectedly. While the mission itself had been in the works, the breakthrough was spontaneous. A pilot from the Iraqi Air Force named Munir Redfa made contact with the Israeli embassy in Paris. He had trained in the Soviet Union and was flying the MiG-21, and now he was ready to defect. Israel offered him $1 million in Israeli citizenship. In return, Redfa demanded something very reasonable: the safe extraction of his family from Iraq. In internal communications, the MiG-21 was referred to by code name Diamond, hence the operation's name, Operation Diamond. On August 15, 1966, during a routine Iraqi Air Force training flight, Redfa took off in the MiG-21 at 7:30 a.m. Mid-flight, he changed course, flying low to avoid radar detection, and crossed the border into Jordanian airspace, staying invisible to defense systems. Near the northern Dead Sea, he was met in the air by an Israeli fighter jet. It escorted him safely to an Israeli airbase. The entire flight lasted 25 minutes. Once landed, the MiG-21 was immediately dismantled and thoroughly studied. The insights gained would prove invaluable during the Six-Day War the following year. It was a daring, bold, and brilliantly executed mission, one of Mossad's most audacious operations ever. In 1965, Mossad faced its first major failure. Israel was trying to expand its network of allies, and Morocco was the only Arab country willing to engage diplomatically. The Moroccans said, "We're open to cooperation, but we've got a problem. There's this guy, Mehdi Ben Barka. He's our top opposition figure. He's constantly campaigning against us. He has a huge support base, and he's fled the country. Last we heard, he's in Paris, maybe Geneva. We can't track him. We can't touch him." So, and with help from the CIA and Moroccan intelligence, Ben Barka was lured out of hiding, abducted, and killed. When French authorities, then President Charles de Gaulle himself, learned of this, the reaction was explosive. France severed all military, economic, and trade ties with Israel. They issued a formal protest. Meanwhile, Mossad's network in France was exposed, and that became Mossad's first publicly known international scandal. It was also the first time evidence of Mossad-CIA cooperation leaked to the press. The second major failure came just 2 years later, with the outbreak of the Six-Day War. The war came as a shock. Mossad missed it. Director Meir Amit was heavily criticized. He had ignored warnings from military intelligence, which had been reporting signs that Egypt and Syria were preparing for an invasion. Yes, Israel won the war, but in the early days the situation was near catastrophic, and for that, Mir Amit was forced to resign. His replacement, Zvi Zamir, took over in 1968, becoming Mossad's fourth director. The name Zvi Zamir is most closely tied to two major operations, but without question, the most famous of them, the one that inspired numerous documentaries and several powerful feature films, was Operation Wrath of God. It was launched in response to a horrifying terrorist attack carried out by Palestinian militants, the massacre of the Israeli Olympic team at the 1972 Munich Games. The terrorist group Black September kidnapped the Israeli athletes in an attempt to exchange them for imprisoned comrades. Mossad offered to assist the Germans in freeing the hostages, but West Germany refused, deciding to handle it with their own police forces. The result was a disastrous raid. All of the hostages were killed, along with 5 of the 8 terrorists, and the 3 terrorists who were captured? They were released just weeks later after Lufthansa Flight 615 was hijacked, and the hijackers demanded their freedom. That after the Munich massacre, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir stood before the Knesset and declared, "Israel will pursue the terrorists wherever they are, with all the power and means our people can muster." She called in Zvi Zamir, head of Mossad, and simply said, "Call your boys." And the boys went to work. They launched Operation Wrath of God. By 1973, just a year after the Munich attack, 13 out of the 17 men who had planned, financed, and orchestrated the massacre were dead. The operations were bold, even theatrical. One terrorist was killed by a bomb hidden inside a hotel room telephone. When he answered the call, the device exploded. Killings took place in multiple countries: France, Greece, Cyprus, and one of the most daring missions happened in Beirut. In that operation, Mossad agents landed on the beach undercover. Rental cars, booked through a fake travel agency, were waiting for them. They drove through the city, headed to safe houses used by the Palestine Liberation Front. They shot everyone inside, then moved on to the next target, the group's command center, and eliminated everyone there too. Afterward, the agents returned to the beach, got back into their boats, and vanished into the sea. That entire operation, including the Beirut raid, was planned by a woman, one of Mossad's most valuable operatives. Wrath of God was not a silent mission. These were deliberate, public executions. Details of the hits were leaked to the press, carefully, strategically. Mossad never officially claimed responsibility, but the message was crystal clear. It was us. We will find you, and no one walks away alive. That phrase, "No negotiations with terrorists," is an Israeli mantra, and Wrath of God was its most brutal embodiment. You kill our people, we kill you. No discussions, no compromises. Another legendary mission took place in 1972, known as Operation Isotope 1. Once again, the perpetrators were members of Black September, the same Palestinian militant group behind the Munich massacre. It was May 8, 1972. A Boeing 707 was flying the route Brussels, Vienna, Tel Aviv. 4 terrorists, 2 men and 2 women traveling on forged documents, boarded the plane. Shortly after takeoff, the group's leader, Abu Sneina, stormed the cockpit. The pilot announced the hijacking. The hijackers' demands: the plane must land on Israeli soil, the release of 315 Palestinian prisoners within 24 hours, a payment of $1 million, a guaranteed escape route. Israel agreed to everything. Negotiations began. The hijackers received food, open communication, and constant contact. They never once heard the word no. Eventually, Red Cross personnel and technical maintenance crews were allowed aboard. The hijackers were told the plane needed to be checked. It couldn't take off due to technical issues. But the technicians weren't technicians at all. They were Mossad agents. The operation was under Mossad command. One of the operatives, who personally shot the hijackers' leader, was Danny Yatam, who would later become head of Mossad himself. The agents stormed the plane. They opened fire, killing the terrorists. The final hijacker tried to hide in the lavatory. It didn't help. He was killed through the door. In the midst of the chaos, one operative, Uzi Dayan, who would later lead Israel's National Security Council, did the unthinkable. He snatched a live grenade out of a female hijacker's hand. The operation was a flawless success. Among the participants was another young operative, Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, that Netanyahu. Operation Isotope 1 became a textbook case for hostage rescue, studied and admired worldwide. And just to give you a sense of how fast and precise it was, the entire takedown, from breach to final shot, lasted 90 seconds. In the 1970s and 80s, Mossad oversaw two operations that became the stuff of legend. One of them, conducted in coordination with Israeli Special Forces, was Operation Entebbe. On June 27, 1976, militants from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and revolutionary cells hijacked an Air France Airbus en route from Tel Aviv to Athens to Paris. Soon after takeoff, the hijackers stormed the cockpit and ordered the pilots to fly to Uganda. At that time, Uganda was ruled by Idi Amin, a brutal dictator known for his support of the Palestinians and his hatred of Jews. The plane was forced to land at Entebbe Airport near Uganda's capital, Kampala. There were 260 people on board. Once on the ground, the hostages were separated into two groups. One, Israeli citizens and Jews. The other, non-Israelis and non-Jews, who were later released after negotiations with Germany, France, Switzerland, and the UK. But the Jewish passengers remained captive. The hijackers demanded the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. Israel began diplomatic negotiations, with the help of international organizations, to try and secure the hostages' release. But as we would later learn, thanks to declassified documents in 2010, Mossad had been planning a military rescue all along. The negotiations? A distraction. But how do you stage a rescue mission in Uganda, 4,000 kilometers away? Israel didn't have aircraft with that kind of range, no mid-air refueling available, and the countries surrounding Uganda were hostile. They would never allow Israeli jets to land or refuel. So Mossad turned to Kenya, the only plausible launch point, and negotiations began. While the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, drew up the combat plan, Mossad agents were tasked with gathering intelligence. How many hijackers were in the terminal? What weapons did they have? Where were the hostages being held? Thanks to Mossad's fieldwork, they built a full picture. And then, the operation began. Multiple aircraft took off, flying across the Egyptian airspace near Sharm el-Sheikh, then dipped to an altitude of just 30 meters to evade radar detection from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Syria. They turned southeast toward Nairobi, Kenya, and landed to refuel. Then came the assault. The challenge? On the tarmac were 50 fighter jets, MiG-17s and MiG-21s, that could be used to pursue the Israelis if things went wrong. Two Boeing 707s accompanied the C-130. Hercules aircraft. One carried a field hospital and landed at Nairobi's Jomo Kenyatta Airport. The other served as a command center, circling overhead throughout the mission. At 11 p.m., Israeli forces landed at Entebbe. Loading doors had been opened mid-air for speed. A convoy of Land Rovers and a black Mercedes rolled off the ramp. A fake motorcade meant to trick Ugandan guards into thinking Idi Amin himself was arriving. But two soldiers on duty remembered. Amin had recently switched to a white Mercedes. They demanded the convoy stop. The commandos silently took them down using suppressed pistols, but one of the guards survived, and a commando quickly finished him off with a rifle to prevent alarm. Fearing the hijackers would notice something was wrong, the team rushed the terminal. They jumped from their vehicles and stormed the building. Before firing, they shouted in Hebrew and English, "Get down! Get down! We are Israeli soldiers!" The firefight inside lasted just 1 minute and 45 seconds. Meanwhile, more C-130s landed. Armored vehicles rolled out to secure the perimeter, fend off potential Ugandan retaliation, and destroy the MiG fighters on the runway to prevent any chase. An hour after the raid began, the first plane carrying freed hostages took off for Nairobi. 42 minutes later, the last aircraft left Ugandan airspace. According to participants, the plan was 2% preparation and 98% improvisation, because nothing like this had ever been done before. The numbers are staggering. Total time on the ground, 53 minutes. Combat phase, 30 minutes. All 7 hijackers and 33 to 45 Ugandan soldiers were killed. 8 Ugandan fighter jets were destroyed. Of 106 hostages, 3 were killed, 10 wounded, 1 remained in Uganda, 102 were rescued and flown home. Only 1 commando was killed. Yonatan Netanyahu, the unit commander and elder brother of Benjamin Netanyahu. He was shot in the throat and died instantly. At least 5 other commandos were injured. But even with those losses, Operation Entebbe became a blueprint for hostage rescue missions around the world. One word sums it up: unprecedented, flying 4,000 kilometers, launching an assault that lasted less than 2 minutes, and leaving an hour later with over 100 lives saved. It was one of Mossad's finest hours. In the 1980s, under Mossad chief Yitzhak Hofi, the agency took part in one of the most controversial military operations in Israeli history, Operation Opera, the airstrike that destroyed Iraq's nuclear reactor at Syria. The reactor was believed to be part of a covert nuclear weapons program, and while the Israeli Air Force carried out the actual attack, it was Mossad that tracked the progress of Iraq's program for years. Ironically, Hofi opposed the operation. He believed a direct aerial strike was too risky, but the Israeli government overruled him. On June 7, 1981, Israeli fighter jets flew into Iraq and obliterated the reactor before it could go live. A year later, Nahum Admoni became Mossad's new director, 1982 to 1989. Under his leadership, Mossad carried out the assassination of Abu Jihad, the deputy of Yasser Arafat, and a key military strategist for the Palestinian Liberation Organization. In the mid-80s, Mossad faced a major public scandal. An Israeli nuclear technician named Mordechai Vanunu became disillusioned with the state and revealed to a foreign journalist that Israel was secretly building nuclear weapons. Vanunu leaked photos and insider knowledge, something Israel had never officially acknowledged, to the global press. Panicking, Mossad launched a covert operation to track him down. Vanunu had fled the country and disappeared until he met a stunning woman in Rome who seemed to idolize him. They had a passionate whirlwind affair, and she listened intently to every word of his truth. She was, of course, a Mossad agent. When Vanunu let his guard down, he was abducted in Rome, smuggled back to Israel, and imprisoned. He served 18 years, was released in 2005, and is still barred from using the internet, phones, or leaving the country. He writes books, wins human rights awards, and is hailed by some as a martyr of free speech, while others see him as a traitor. In 1984, Ethiopia was gripped by civil war and famine. Thousands of Ethiopian Jews were trapped in dire conditions, and the Israeli government, with Mossad at the helm, launched a massive covert evacuation. The result was Operation Moses, a logistical masterstroke. Using rented barges, disguised aircraft, and fake travel agencies, Mossad smuggled more than 17,000 Ethiopian Jews out of the country and into Israel between 1984 and 1985. It remains one of the most humanitarian and daring operations in Mossad's history. Starting in the 1990s, less and less information about Mossad made it to the press. Some claim the agency simply lost its edge. Others believe the world itself had changed. But the most likely explanation? We'll only learn about Mossad's operations from the 90s decades later. For now, most of what we know are the failures. In the early 90s, Mossad attempted to bug the Iranian embassy in Nicosia, Cyprus, but their agents were caught red-handed. They were later returned to Israel after quiet negotiations. Then in 1997 came a much bigger fiasco. Mossad tried to assassinate Hamas leader Khalid Mashal in Amman, Jordan. Agents approached him on the street and injected poison into his ear. But the operation went sideways. They were caught. The king of Jordan demanded that Israel hand over the antidote in exchange for the agent's release. Israel complied, sending the antidote, and Mossad got its agents back. Let's talk about the women. You've already met one. The woman behind the honey trap that brought Mordechai Vanunu back to Israel. Known to the world as Cindy, her real name was Cheryl Ben-Tov. An elegant blonde, she met Vanunu in a London park. A week-long whirlwind romance followed. Cindy, ever so casually, said she'd always wanted to see Rome. Vanunu couldn't say no. The moment they landed in Italy, Mossad agents grabbed him and he was smuggled onto a cargo ship bound for Israel, where he would stand trial. But Cheryl wasn't the only legend. Amina al-Mufti, born in Jordan, was one of Mossad's most prized operatives. A doctor by profession, she volunteered for Mossad in 1972. She was intelligent, striking, and capable of winning the trust of even the most paranoid. Mossad sent her to Beirut, where she opened a medical clinic, and soon became a trusted confidant of Palestinian militants and their families. It was Amina who helped plan one of Mossad's most legendary operations, the Beirut strikes tied to Wrath of God, targeting those responsible for the 1972 Munich massacre. Thanks to her intelligence work, maps, locations, safe houses, Mossad was able to launch Operation Spring of Youth. Agents landed on the beaches of Beirut, stormed terrorist hideouts, and eliminated key figures from Black September. Amina remained in the field for a while, until she was eventually captured. She vanished for 5 years. Mossad had no idea where she was. She had been held in a dark cave, tortured, interrogated. What exactly happened during those years remains unclear, but through Red Cross mediation, she was freed and returned to Israel. Today, she lives quietly, running a small medical clinic. Her patients have no idea that their doctor was once the mastermind behind one of the boldest operations in Mossad's history. And that's the story, or at least the part of it we're allowed to know, of one of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. Today, Mossad operates with an estimated annual budget of 10 billion shekels and a staff of around 7,000. Remember, they started with just 12 field operatives. Mossad is a civilian agency. There are no military ranks, but every single operative is a veteran of the Israeli Defense Forces. Until the 1960s, even the name Mossad was forbidden from appearing in any official publication. Until the late 1990s, the director's identity was kept entirely secret. Today, Mossad has a public website, a museum, and a brand that echoes around the world. But despite the modern makeover, one thing hasn't changed. Mossad reports directly to the Prime Minister. It's not governed by law. There is no oversight committee, no international watchdog, just a network of agents with a license to do whatever it takes, answering only to the very top. So yes, the world still has its real-life 007s. See you soon.